History has always shown that as the world changes over time, so does everything else. This can be civilization, the environment, lifestyles, and so much more. Art is one of these characteristics that has undergone this process, and we can see how much change art has gone through over time. The 19th century is one of these movements, being a period of time where art was centered around topics such as Orientalism and the male gaze. During the movement of modernism, art created during this time was based on the Industrial Revolution, but there wasn't any art that focused on the harsh realities of the working class. In 1848, however, the publication of the Communist Manifesto and the 1848 Revolution gave birth to the new art style, realism. Later on, Impressionism would also rise. As the 19th century began to transition into the 20th, so did art. From the era where Impressionism bloomed, many artists, both new and old, would begin to create works that show this transition in time. Two artists from the 19th century, Paul Cézanne and Edvard Munch, are examples of artists who did so, both creating pieces that show the 19th century coming to a close and welcoming the 20th. Upon observing pieces from the late 19th century from each individual artist and comparing it to their previous works, it is clear that there is cultural significance present within them, showcasing how art transformed in a matter of years. Before I begin each analysis of the works of Paul Cézanne and Edvard Munch, I'd like to briefly go over the lives of these artists from the same time period, but lived through different experiences. Born in Aix-en-Provence, France on January 19, 1839, French artist Paul Cézanne would become one of the most influential artists that lived during the 19th century. Cézanne's father, both a banker and a lawyer, had encouraged his son to pursue a career similar to his, but according to Benedict Leca from the National Gallery of Art, Cézanne would discover his passion for art after taking classes at the free drawing school attached to the Musée d'Aix. In 1874, after years of establishing himself as a painter and facing rejection from institutes that would provide professional training, Cézanne and several other artists would showcase their work all together at Paul Nadar's studio and become known as the Impressionists. During his time as an Impressionist, Cézanne's work did not exactly meet the standards of the Impressionist technique, but he would eventually abandon his relatively dark palette in exchange for brilliant tones and began painting out of doors. Though Cézanne's art style adjusted during his time as an Impressionist, the French painter left the Impressionists in 1886 to pursue the reconstruction of the Impressionist style. His works after his withdrawal from the Impressionists showcase his journey of reconstructing Impressionism, eventually diving into the style of what would become known as Cubism. The first piece that I will be analyzing will be Paul Cézanne's painting Les Baigneurs, or The Bathers, which I discovered in the Hammer Museum's online Grunwald Center collection. This piece is from 1896 and is a lithograph printed in color that presents four human figures present in what appears to be a forest-like setting with a mountain scene in the background. The overall color palette of this piece is slightly desaturated, which can contradict an earlier statement regarding how Cézanne transitioned from using dark color palettes to more saturated ones while he was an Impressionist. However, this can be disregarded as this was only the first stage of this piece. It is possible that later on, the color of Le Baigneur would become much more saturated, but for now, this initial version of the piece is the one that is most commonly seen. Though the palette is the slightest bit desaturated, it establishes an overall cooler color profile and contributes to the relaxed and tranquil behavior of the figures. Cézanne uses color to establish the form of the subjects of the painting, along with some simple blocks of value, but he also uses light to enhance them. His use of the technique of hatching strengthens the direction where light is hitting each subject and the placement of darker shadows within the piece. Along with this, the lines of every component within the piece are very loose, almost gesture-like, yet they remain uniform. From a viewer's perspective, particularly one who possesses no knowledge regarding the context of the Baigneurs, this piece could be interpreted as one where Cézanne might have done this piece in real time, capturing the actions that unfolded at that moment. However, after some research, an essay written by James Voorhies and published by the Met Museum reveals that Cézanne had actually drawn the figures from his imagination, as he rarely painted nudes from life and wanted the nude figures to reconcile themselves within this setting. With Paul Cézanne's usage of line, color, and light all working together in this piece to capture nature and memory of the human body, it appears that Cézanne had also succeeded in reconstructing the Impressionist style. Comparing and contrasting this piece with other pieces from his time as an Impressionist, the most notable observation that stood out the most was how he established a human figure. Taking a closer look at Les Baigneurs, it is noticeable that the faces of some figures, especially the one lying down and the one on the right with their leg placed on what appears to be a rock, are very abstract. Some may argue that it might not even be anatomically correct. Again, Paul Cézanne drew the figures from imagination rather than from observation. With all these components working together, all of it pertains to how Cézanne viewed painting as his career progressed. Cézanne's biography on TheArtStory.org discusses how he approached painting as he got older. The subject of the painting was first to be read by the artist through the understanding of its essence. Then, this essence must be realized on a canvas through forms, colors, and their spatial relations. In this piece alone, Cézanne shows that he understood said essence, leading him to realize it as it was brought to life. Because of his mindset of realizing this essence on a canvas, color, line, and light become dominant in this piece, capturing this moment of realization. Les Baigneurs comes from a series of paintings that was established as Cézanne's death drew closer, but it also showcases how 19th century art was starting to change as the 20th century drew closer. It is known that as Cézanne neared his death in 1906, the French painter would have a series of artworks that solely focused on the depiction of Mont Sainte-Victoire. However, Cézanne also had another series that he focused on at the same time, which was the Bather series, and Les Baigneurs was one of the pieces that resulted from it. Focusing on the final synthesis of nature in the human body, the Bather series does indeed capture the unity between the two. Les Baigneurs alone captures that final synthesis of the human body in nature, showing the strong yet peaceful connection between them. As Cézanne's death drew closer, his art style became even more abstract. Cézanne's more abstract pieces that came from his last few years of living showcased the shift of art styles as the 19th century came to a close. His late work showed how art and artists were evolving yet again, but his contribution would greatly influence what would become one of the most well-known styles of art in the 20th century, Cubism. It can be agreed that Paul Cézanne's Les Baigneurs assisted in capturing a turning page in time and in art, but perhaps this series, along with the Mont Sainte-Victoire series, captures Cézanne's final synthesis with nature and himself. The next artist that I will be focusing on is Edvard Munch, who is most popularly known for his piece, The Screen. In Adalsbruck, Norway, on December 12, 1863, Edvard Munch grew up in a challenging home environment. 5 years after his birth, Munch's mother passed away, leaving him and his siblings to be raised by his father, who suffered from mental illness and raised him with the fear of deep-seated issues. As a result of how he was raised, his art would present rather deeper themes in his artwork, such as death and loss. Munch's art, which reflected the psychological trauma he experienced during his youth, was completely different in comparison to the art of the Impressionists. Though his style was much different to theirs, Munch was still influenced by them, and his style reflected more on post-impressionism. Known for using very intense colors through a semi-abstract style, the piece that I will be analyzing is not as intense in terms of color, but rather through line and light. Completed in the same year as Cézanne's piece, Lovers in the Waves by Edvard Munch is a hand-painted lithograph that presents two people floating together in a body of water. It is easy to miss with just a quick glance, but the second figure is seen with his face being directed towards the woman's, as if he is embracing her. This piece creates many questions as one looks at it. Who are these people? Are they still lovers, or have they broken up but still hold on to what remains of their former relationship? What is the correlation between the two subjects and the waves? With the themes and styles of Munch's past works and his history of psychological trauma, one can assume that this piece is going to be similar to such past works. Regardless of what the answer may be, Lovers in the Waves captures the moment in Munch's career where a rich brew of emotional, intellectual, and physical experience formed the substance which nurtured his art, meaning that the Norwegian artist was exploring new ideas as the 19th century gradually came to its end. Not much is recorded about this piece, yet it still shows that while Munch's work captured themes of death and loss, he had also begun to capture the themes of love and angst. In the 1890s, this exploration of new themes would be what EdvardMunch.org writes as the frieze of life, which Munch would constantly revisit for the remaining years of his life. With the lack of color, the weight of the piece's lines, and the more dominating presence of shadows rather than light, these characteristics alone already contribute to Munch's exploration of love and angst. The perspective of the piece and the weight of the lines indicates that we are looking at these figures from above, watching them float away as they lie in the body of water. Because of the heavy weight of some lines, this makes up for the lack of color within the piece, but also works together with the light source present. The areas where white is seen can be correlated with sunlight shining on top of the lovers' faces and the body of water. With this, the remaining lines and their weight establishes how deep the water truly is, establishing the message that the body of water the lovers are in is not shallow at all. These three components all work together in Lover in the Waves to create an emotional piece, one where Munch pulls the viewer in and allows them to absorb what they see. Along with light, color, and line, the finer details in Lovers in the Waves also contributes in showing how emotional this piece is as a result of Munch's exploration of new themes. The expression on the woman's face appears to be one where it looks like she has accepted being in the moment Munch has placed her and her lover in, the emotion being one of peacefulness. Due to the man's face being turned towards the woman, the viewer cannot get a proper view of his facial expression and leaves us to interpret it however we wish. Perhaps Lovers in the Waves focuses on the acceptance of a lover's death, or maybe the angst that a couple might experience throughout their relationship, the feeling being resembled through floating on a body of water and accepting the outcome due to the lack of a solution. Baigneurs and Lovers in the Waves both come from the same year, but they capture how the lives of Paul Cézanne and Edvard Munch were changing as the 20th century approached the two artists and the rest of the world. One piece was made by an artist whose life was starting to come to its end, while the other was created by someone who was inspired by the man who altered Impressionism and still had many more years of living left. Though Munch did not know Cézanne personally, the Norwegian artist and his style was influenced by the French painter's reconstruction of Impressionism. After doing research around these two works and the artist, it can be seen that there is some sort of cultural significance that resulted from these two. From Paul Cézanne's departure from the Impressionists and time of reconstructing Impressionism, Edvard Munch would later on come across the Impressionists and Cézanne's work and would be influenced by it. After Munch's passing, it is noted that he became an inspiration to those that followed after him. From these two artists alone, it is seen how as time progresses, the changes that follow are absorbed as newer generations are brought into the world. Some may argue that change is a good thing, maybe even bad, but through Paul Cézanne and Edvard Munch, we see how aspects of art from the past are altered as they are brought into the present and into the future, yet they still pay homage to their origins. Today, in our current era and movement of art, we can see that there are artists out there that mirror the art movements of the past, and as the future approaches, artists will continue to keep this cycle moving.